and they burned these fossil fuels. And with that, we were able to do magical, amazing things. We were able to light our homes and heat our ovens. We were able to create some of the technology that ultimately allowed for us to have cars, to have hot water, to have electricity, all of the things that allow us to live the life that we live right now in the rooms that we are in. And at the same time, by burning these fossil fuels, we were also slowly locking ourselves in to an addiction that would ultimately threaten the future of our existence as humankind. And we were locking ourselves into an addiction that was about extracting things deep within the Earth's core that weren't renewable, that couldn't be created again for millions and millions of years. And by doing so, we were not just extracting things from the Earth, but we were also extracting labor from its people. From coal miners who had to go miles deep into the Earth and sometimes died when the mines collapsed, to Black and brown communities who were living close to polluting facilities where they burned oil and gas and all of these things, and the pollutants went straight into the lungs of our Black and brown children, to the pipelines that ran through. People started to completely disrespected Indian treaties, and the pipelines that snaked their way through Indian lands and polluted people's waters. And so at the same time that we lost our relationship with nature, you also see the rise of losing our relationship with other humans. You saw the rise of colonization, the rise of capitalism, of polluting and plundering the earth, and polluting and plundering its people at the same time. And there's a lot to say. You cannot actually distinguish these two things. They go hand in hand. So in the middle of that, as we saw this pollution also creating, we saw as early as the early 1900s and the mid-century, scientists and people beginning to warn us that the pollution was getting to be too much. That we were spewing, as a result of burning these fossil fuels, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide, what it does is it goes into the atmosphere and it creates a thick blanket that allows for the sun's heat to come down and reach the earth and then traps it. And what that means is our activity over the last 100 and 150 years alone has created so much pollution in the atmosphere that our planet globally, imagine how big our planet is. Our activity alone is raising the temperature of our entire Earth.
Let me check.
And in the process is throwing all of our delicate ecosystems and our social systems and the foundations with which we created human civilization, the rules with which we grow our food, how we get from place to place, how we interact with one another, the places we call home, into complete and utter disarray and disbalance and imbalance. And in the midst of that, there were people, a small group of people, who discovered that they could make money off of this addiction. That as we grew more and more addicted to burning oil and gas to live our lives, that they could profit off of that very way of existence. These were people like the Koch brothers, who received their first money from their father, who built refineries for people like Hitler and Stalin. And so you see the connection between white supremacy and the creation of the climate crisis. And lots of people know the Koch brothers for being the destroyers of democracy, for their dark money, for pursuing racism and white supremacy. But a lot of people don't know that the reason they are doing this is not just for ideology's sake. It is to protect an empire. An empire that has been built off of oil and gas. And in doing so, they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars corrupting our democracy, strategically using racism to divide working people, and and in doing so, creating such a hatred of our government and such animosity between one another that we don't have the resources and the ability to fight the greatest existential threat of our lifetimes. There are people who have used our addiction for oil to fight countless unnecessary wars in the Middle East, to kill millions of people, and in doing so enrich people who make money off of arms and manufacturing weapons. And we have seen the greed of a few essentially working to drive us to the edge of existence, and people already experiencing the impacts of a world thrown out of imbalance. So that's what got us here today. And for those of you who might be less familiar with the science, currently we are at 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That doesn't mean a lot to too many people. What it means is that this is the first time this has happened in 3 million years on this planet. That level of concentration of pollution in the atmosphere warming the planet. The last time this happened, forests grew in Antarctica. The last time this happened, sea levels were 50 feet higher. Cities like Miami would not exist. The last time this happened, Homo sapiens, as in the people who we are and understand ourselves to be as humans, did not walk the earth. That level of carbon dioxide is locked into the atmosphere right now. So right now, if we don't limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, or about 3 degrees Fahrenheit globally, think about how small that is, right? 3 degrees Fahrenheit. The entirety of sub-Saharan Africa may not be able to grow food, or may be hostile to growing food. Entire nations will go underwater. The coastal reefs will be lost forever until they're able to build back. And we have already warmed the planet 0.9 degrees Celsius, about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're about halfway there. Can anyone share? I'd love for people to just share the circle, like, what are the effects of a warming world that you are already seeing in our community? Yeah.
Okay, so I had to scale back some things around the climate crisis because I had like a breakdown over the summer around this. Actually, it started in March and continued all the way up into August.
Yeah.
And I had one a few years ago before. But I'm from Kansas City, and the weather has been terrible, terrible. Farmers couldn't plant crops until almost July this year. Now people are worried that there will be a food shortage because Kansas produces the most wheat in this country. My hometown has so many floods. We were having these things called bomb cyclones that no one's ever heard of. We were having thunderstorms during snowstorms in December, followed by thunderstorms, followed by more snowstorms. We were having flash floods. Trees were rotting and falling over because there was so much water on top of the ground, on frozen soil, or just seeping into the ground. There was this town I forgot the name of it, there's a small town that's directly next to my hometown that was wiped out by a tornado. That was a mile wide. It was the biggest tornado anyone's ever seen. All of this happened this year. From December to June, all of these things happened. And this is really rough to say, but I have a classmate that I grew up with, and she had bad asthma, which no one talked about the pollution, but she died from an asthma attack. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
My first experience with Michigan was in October of 2001. Snow everywhere, never saw snow before, happiest little kid ever. October 1st, it was 87 degrees. Like, 19 years later, or 18 years later. Like, so that's like my basic reality, is that I came in with this big ass coat as a little kid, snow everywhere, and it's 87 degrees on October 1st.
And those 19 years have been the hottest years. Each one of those have been one of the hottest
Oh
years.
yeah, Lake Michigan doesn't like get cold anymore really. Like they used to say that technically the warmest time to go swimming is October, just on how water warms, but it's kind of stays warm. Like it doesn't freeze. Like that's so that I remember taking an environmental class, and it's so crucial for specifically Lake Michigan to freeze, and it hasn't really frozen the way it used to anymore.
We'll just take like one more.
I recently went to Puerto Rico and I saw a street art installation, and it had about 7 pieces of poetry, and it had 2 candles, and it was weird because it was lit, so the artist must have put it up right before I got there. But I'm gonna read you a short poem. I'm gonna translate it in English, but it moved me, and I'm gonna read it right now. So picture we paste poems, and I'm reading one of them right now. In this page, there's no electricity nor water, service on the phone or channels on the television or the internet. We don't know of anyone. We are locked in our car. My mother, my stepdad, and myself, we are paying attention to the radio. We need to know how much happened, that we don't have anything. Or if they already gave the news, if it's official for everyone, that it's gonna be our time to be an island. Literally, exactly that. We have been ignored in an island. So these people were stuck in a car, and they're explaining this through the poetry.
Yeah, I mean, the impacts that we're seeing, like 3,000 people in Puerto Rico, right? And they didn't die because of literally rainfall. They died because in the year following, like they didn't have electricity or access to medical devices. Like people didn't have access to clean water. They died in pollution for that. When I think about I think part of why, I mean, there was a lot of messed up stuff that was happening at the border, and I think one of the scariest things to me was this feeling that a lot of people think about what was happening at the border and Trump putting kids in cages and all of that as his immigration policy. To me, that was his climate policy. And there are people in Honduras and there are people all across Central America who had to leave their homes as farmers because the ground does not yield food anymore. And they are stuck in a fight, a choice between being stuck in poverty and in violence and leaving their home, or seeking sanctuary in another country where they are met with guns and dogs and cages. And to me, when I think about it's not that many people who are in this refugee crisis right now. When we think about, even though it feels really intense, the climate crisis, people estimate that it will be around 150 million to 200 million climate refugees by mid-century. To give you some context, the Syrian refugee crisis was somewhere between 5 to 7 million people. And that has if you think about what that has led to in terms of the seeds of white supremacy really sprouting across all of Europe, was a huge, huge factor in that. So I think there's a lot of the way that it's manifesting is also when I think about incarcerated people. And I think when you think about who are the people who get left behind every single time there is a flood or a storm. Every time there's a storm, I feel like our team is hustling to get as many people to call the governor of that state to get prisoners out of jail that are in the path of the storm. Literally being left to drown and die. When you think about who has to fight the fires in the West Coast that are are spreading at a rate of 80 football fields a minute in some places, it is always incarcerated people who then cannot get jobs being firefighters after they have been let go. So this isn't, a lot of times we, think about this as I know for me when I was learning about it for the first time, I watched that Al Gore movie and I was like, what the fuck? This doesn't resonate with me. communities of color and other folks were like, oh, like, we need to fight racism over here, and like the climate crisis, like, white folks got that with the like polar bears and the park pavilion and whatever. But I guess what I'll say is like, I think this is the kind of fight that will end all of us, but it will end some of us way sooner. And there's always the moment when humans thinking that we can conquer Mother Nature and that we can like enslave Mother Nature in that process, and every single time that humankind has gone up against Mother Nature, she has defeated us, and this is certainly one of those situations, and we cannot win this fight. And so I think that's a lot of what I think about when I see all of these systems out of place. It's a system that's out of whack and is getting angrier and angrier at the level of pollution and violence that is being enacted on the planet. So, okay, I would love for folks to take 4 to 5 minutes in, let's say 5 minutes in listening partnerships to talk about just what's coming up for you right now, and also think a little bit about perhaps like how this crisis has affected you personally. Could I? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying that my son is the reason that I got into climate change. He started reading about it, and I felt like as a mom I needed to learn about it. And I decided for me, for me in my work, it's the main work that I need to be doing right now. It doesn't mean that all of us have to make that decision here, but I do feel like we, as organizers, have an ability and a duty to face the reality of the world and to actually be able to look straight at things, even when they're really hard. And you can use the listening partnerships as a place to look at what's really hard. But that's why we're in this work, because we do understand that it's important to look straight at things. And this is something that we need to look straight at. The human race is in danger. Like the extinction, the survival of the entire human race is in danger. And it can feel like it's too much. And we can spend our time not being able to sleep at night.
Exactly.
And I have that regularly, right? And we need to call each other and face this, because we can turn this around, and it's gonna take all of us. And it's gonna take racism and young people being at the center of it. Like, it has to be, young people of color are the ones that need to be at the center. They are the ones that are gonna live the longest, that are gonna be alive when the worst of this happens. And they need to be at the center of this fight, and the people in this room know how to support young people of color to do that. And that means that we need to use a lot of listening partnerships. We have to face this together. We have to look at our discouragement and know that the human race is worth fighting for, and we can do this together. And it's gonna be a mess, and we're gonna have a lot of losses, but we're used to that. We understand loss. We're used to that. We can keep going. It's a really, really big fight, and I would like to invite all of you to join me and Varshini and others of us that have decided that it's in everything that I do, in every topic that I lead, it is part of how I think about things. I don't ever do anything without talking about climate change. I don't get into an Uber without asking about climate change. I don't enter a conversation without climate change being part of how I think about the world, and not just that every person matters. So as we break into these partnerships, what does it mean for you to actually decide, as the organizer that you are, and what you do, to have climate? You don't have to change your whole life around, but just have it be part of the center of how you think about things.
I'm not trying to push back, but there's a lot of racism in the climate movement. Like, I have
That's right.
approached real straight up racists
Yeah.
that have said Mexicans are the reason why there's climate change.
Yeah.
How are you addressing that? Because I don't even feel safe in that space.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah, totally,
I mean, what are you doing to fix that?
yeah.
I'll just say one thing, is that what we've done in our program is we've had that group over here, and we've been over here. And like, there's a lot that and I don't mean that, I think carefully about spaces that I bring the young people from the Boston Public Schools into, but there's so much right? And that was a lot of work that we and them did. So, yes, and that we have to figure out how to like work together with people and do our own project, projects together.
Yeah. I would actually look a little bit to guidance to you all for a second. Is it cool to have a conversation here, or do we want to move into listening partnerships? I know we're a little tight on time.
We should look into listening partnership.
Okay.
There's no conversation that can't continue into lunchtime, that's
Okay, cool. Let's do that then. Okay, let's do that, and we're also available to talk if people want to actually come up to us and talk. I'm happy to actually just have that conversation as well. Yeah.
Let's do that. And let's,
What is an opportunity in the midst of really intense calamity is that we are all in the pursuit of seeking justice and equity for all people. The climate crisis gives us a deadline with which to work on that. And so I'm like, the whole like arc and world, universe is long, bends towards justice, that's fine, but also the climate crisis is literally going, like we are gonna hit a point of no return very quickly on the climate crisis by the time probably that I am 34, 35. And it affords us an opportunity to get to justice that much quicker for all of our people if we play it right. And so the ask that I would make of this room is not to join the Sierra Club and like feel like you have to be a part of a movement that you don't feel like speaks for you and your people, but to actually define what climate justice looks like for yourselves. To team up with other people fighting that fight who you see shared values with. We're all there. Absolutely. There are a lot more people out there than I think people might think. To see allies that can help us build a stronger movement that doesn't leave communities behind. And to figure out, like, not how do we get, I think the climate movement made it, partially because of the identities that people held, made a mistake of being like, oh, we like need to decarbonize, let's like slap this priority of decarbonization onto communities that have been in emergency for the last like hundreds of years, and then be mad, and then come away with the assumption that Black people don't care about the climate crisis. But actually be like, what do you actually care about, and how do we connect that to the climate crisis? And I think people who have been working in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans have been doing amazing work communicating how those things relate, and a lot of people in disaster, like in the aftermath of disaster, have been doing that work because it's communities of color and working people that get hit first and worst, right? So that's just my ask of you, and if you need help thinking through it or what it looks like, I'm happy to share resources and talk to people about that. And on the question of what we can do and what I say to people, like, there is a lot at stake right now. And I think what gets me through it on the day-to-day, like this conversation that we are having right now is the conversation I have like with myself and with other people every minute of my life. And the thing that gets me through it when it gets heavy is just knowing that like there is a lot of suffering that happens in the world that cannot be stopped. There is a lot of suffering that happens in the world that can. This is one of them, and it is my duty to do everything in my power to stop it. And failure in the face of that only manifests in the not striving. And that the striving itself and trying to make it and to do everything in your power is the definition of success, when like we are contending with systems and structures that were created long before I even existed on this planet, and I'm now having the responsibility of cleaning it up, as are we. So I think, at some level, like, knowing that people are already perishing, and knowing that every fraction of a decimal point of warming that we avoid could literally mean life or death for millions of people. And so even as millions suffer, there are millions more who don't because of our actions. And like we have a duty to make sure that that happens. So that's what I tell people.
And I will say that things are moving. Like this year we started started our program at Boston Student Advisory Council, and we had 50 people show up at the first meeting, and every single young person there understood that climate change was their issue. And that is, 4 years ago, that was not true. Like, the climate strikes that are happening on many Fridays internationally are the biggest movement ever on the globe. There's never been an issue that's been so global.
There were 7 million young people, like grade school kids and high schoolers who were striking on September 20th. 7 million around the world.
And things are really moving, people are understanding things differently. Like, we are in a very exciting, incredible time to be an organizer. And there's lots of hope out there, and I have never, in all my years, I've never seen something move so fast. And the awareness, and a lot of that's because I hang out with young people a lot, and just watch them, this is their issue, and it's time for us to follow them. And it is not a white issue. And
And don't let people